Imagine a world where losing a war forces an empire to rethink its punishments, sending its outcasts not across an ocean to a familiar land, but to the unknown ends of the earth. As Britain's prisons overflowed with the desperate and the defiant, a bold decision loomed, one that would test human endurance against the vast, unforgiving sea. But what awaited them on those distant shores would demand even more. In England, 1786, the prisons are bursting at the seams. For decades, Britain had shipped its criminals to America, thieves, forgers, the hungry stealing bread. Then, America won its independence. That door slammed shut forever. So, in 1787, they loaded 11 ships with 775 convicts. Men and women chained below decks pointed toward the other side of the world. 8 months at sea, 15,000 miles of rolling waves, howling winds, and relentless sickness. 48 people died on the way, buried in the cold, endless ocean. The survivors, pale and weary, strained their eyes for land. No familiar sights greeted them, no European roads, no buildings. Just the local Eora people watching from the wooded shores, and an untouched harbor shimmering under a vast blue sky. With no blueprint for survival, these unwilling pioneers faced a harsh new reality, where every decision could mean life or death in this alien wilderness. Yet, from these fragile beginnings, something unexpected began to emerge. This is Sydney, January 26, 1788. The ships have just anchored in Port Jackson. No one on board has ever seen this place before. The harbor stretches wide, deep waters lapping at wooded shores, complete silence broken only by the creak of their vessels and distant bird calls. Their commander, Arthur Phillip, called it the finest natural harbor in the world. And looking at it now, sunlight glinting off calm waves, ancient trees whispering in the breeze. It's hard to argue. 3 months after landing, a convict named Francis Folks drew the first ever map of Sydney Cove. A man sentenced to 7 years transportation for stealing a coat and a pair of boots. His map shows the 11 ships still anchored, a few dirt tracks cutting through the sand. Tents for the men, tents for the women, canvas flapping in the wind. Saw pits echo with the bite of blades into wood. Storehouses rise from rough timber. A blacksmith's hammer rings out, sparks flying in the humid air. Meanwhile, across the world, George Washington is being inaugurated as America's first president. Paris is days away from storming the Bastille, but this is Sydney, that tiny cluster of tents and tracks. The entire city. As the settlement took root, tensions simmered beneath the surface, convicts laboring under watchful eyes, dreaming of freedom in a land that offered none. Little did they know, the colony's challenges were about to multiply. 6 years after landing, Thomas Watling, another convict, transported for forging banknotes in Scotland, painted this view of Sydney Cove directly from nature. The tents are gone now. Brick buildings line the waterfront, their red walls glowing in the afternoon sun. Ships crowd the harbor, sails billowing like white clouds. A town is beginning to take shape, streets of packed earth, voices calling out in trade. Watling himself wasn't impressed. He wrote home, complaining the colony was barely a third the size of his hometown of Dumfries. He wasn't wrong. But it was growing slowly, stubbornly. This was the seat of power, the first government house. Brick walls stand firm, a timber fence encircles it. 2 small sentry boxes flank the gate, guards pacing with muskets slung over shoulders. From here, Arthur Phillip governed a colony of over 1,000 people. The vast majority convicts, men and women who had stolen coats, boots, bread. Guarded by around 200 soldiers barely better off themselves. hungry, homesick, sweating in wool uniforms under the relentless sun. Not quite what a government house is supposed to look like, but it held the whole thing together. Orders barked from its veranda, decisions shaping lives in the flickering light of oil lamps. With growth came new hurdles, forcing ingenuity from the unlikeliest sources, as the line between prisoner and pioneer blurred. And as the century turned, the colony's heart would shift in ways no one predicted. By 1797, the colony had a problem. They were growing grain, golden fields swaying in the breeze, but no way to mill it efficiently. So they built Sydney's first windmill on the highest hill above the settlement. The hill they simply called Windmill Hill. Governor Hunter had the parts shipped from England, iron gears and wooden blades creaking into place. A convict named John Bowen built it, his hands calloused from years of forced labor. It could grind a bushel of wheat in 10 minutes, the scent of fresh flour wafting down the slopes. Below the hill, the rocks, was the convict side of town. They lived in small stone and timber houses, smoke curling from chimneys. Kept chickens clucking in yards, pigs rooting in the dirt, grew vegetables in fenced gardens, earth-rich and dark. After their government work ended in the afternoon, backs aching from quarrying stone, they were largely free, running private trades from home, baking bread in wood-fired ovens, forging tools with hammers ringing late into the night, opening pubs where laughter and ale flowed under lantern light. Less a prison, more a rough working village, clinging to the rugged sandstone cliffs, waves crashing below. The windmill lasted 3 years before falling into disrepair, blades groaning to a halt. But the hill kept its name. Today, it's where the Sydney Observatory stands. Stars twinkling overhead. Expansion brought opportunity, but also simmering resentments as power struggles threatened to unravel the fragile order. What erupted next would echo through the colony's history. By the end of the 1790s, Sydney was no longer just a cove. Convicts who'd served their time, eyes hardened by years of toil, were handed small land grants. 30 acres each, a few tools rusting in the sun, some basic supplies. Sent to farm inland around Parramatta, axes swinging through thick bush. Roads were hacked through the undergrowth, dusty paths winding west. The Hawkesbury River region was already being farmed, crops pushing up from fertile soil before the road to reach it was even finished. Sydney Cove stayed the port, ships creaking into dock, goods unloaded with grunts and sweat, news from the outside world finally landing in hurried letters. But the colony's center of gravity was shifting west, pulling people toward open lands, away from the crowded harbor. 11 years after the first fleet anchored here with no plan and no food, there were now farms stretching inland, roads carving the landscape, a second town rising, population pushing 5,000, voices in a dozen accents, children born under southern skies. It wasn't England, but it was starting to look like something permanent, bricks stacking higher, dreams taking root in the red earth. Amid this budding prosperity, old vices and new ambitions collided, sparking a rebellion that tested the colony's very foundation. Yet, even as chaos loomed, the city pressed on with bold new ventures. 15 years after the first fleet, this is what they'd built. Sandstone houses climbing the hillside, their walls warm in the golden light. Fenced gardens blooming with vegetables. A working wharf bustling with crates and calls. Ships from 3 continents anchored in the same harbor, once nothing but bush, now alive with sails and shouts. The population had reached around 7,000, trading ships arriving regularly, scents of spices and timber mixing in the air. The colony no longer waiting for supply ships to survive. Starting to trade on its own terms, wool bales stacked high, merchants haggling in the dust. Convicts still arriving, chains clanking, but so were free settlers, merchants, sailors who never left, eyes wide with opportunity. Sydney becoming a place people chose, not just a place they were sent. They'd been sent here as punishment, backs scarred from floggings. Now, some of them owned the place, standing tall in fine coats, keys to shops jingling. We saw this building before, a modest brick structure with a timber fence and 2 sentry boxes. That was 1791. By 1807, it had grown. A long drawing room added, candlelight flickering on walls. A veranda extended along the full frontage, shade from the harsh sun. Still not grand by any Europeans. Every governor who lived here complained. It was damp, too small, falling apart, rain dripping through roofs. But it held the whole colony together for 56 years. Australia's first newspaper printed here, ink smudging fresh pages. The first laws issued from here, quills scratching parchment. 9 governors lived and ruled from this address, pacing floors, making decisions that shaped fates. The man who painted it, John Eyre, had arrived as a convict, transported for housebreaking. By 1807, he'd earned his pardon, brush in hand, capturing the very building that once held his fate. In the heat of conflict, ingenuity born of necessity arose, turning vice into vital infrastructure amid growing pains. And as the dust settled, Sydney's skyline would begin to reflect its evolving soul. January 26, 1808, exactly 20 years to the day since the First Fleet anchored here. 400 soldiers marched down Bridge Street, boots pounding the dirt, band playing triumphant tunes, flags flying high, bayonets glinting in the sun. The governor's daughter tries to stop them at the gate, with a parasol raised defiantly. They find Governor Bligh hiding behind a bed, face pale, hands trembling. Australia's first and only military coup, driven by a power struggle over who controlled the rum trade, bottles clinking in hidden stores, fortunes at stake. History would call it the rum. The colony had been running for 20 years and had already overthrown its own government. Voices rising in anger, alliances fracturing. The colony needed a hospital. Wounds festering, illnesses spreading in the humid air. The British government refused to pay for it, so Governor Macquarie made a deal. 3 merchants would build it, in exchange for a monopoly on importing 45,000 gallons of rum into the colony. No money changed hands. The hospital paid for entirely in alcohol, barrels rolling off ships. That's why they called it the Rum Hospital. Construction started in 1811. It took 5 years, mostly because the builders cut so many corners, walls cracking before they stood. Parts of it nearly collapsed before it opened, beams groaning under weight. One of the 3 merchants who built it was also the colony's chief surgeon, the man responsible for treating the sick. Bandages soaked in blood, was also profiting from the rum trade. The north wing of that building still stands today as the New South Wales Parliament House, echoes of debates filling its halls. With defenses bolstered and society stratifying, the human stories of toil and transformation painted a vivid picture of resilience. But the colony's spiritual and disciplinary needs would soon demand even grander expressions. These cannons in the foreground came from the Sirius, one of the original 11 ships of the First Fleet. Wrecked off Norfolk Island in 1790, timbers splintering on rocks. Dragged back to Sydney, mounted here at Dawes Point to defend the harbor, smoke and thunder ready to roar. Below them, the government dockyard bustles, hammers on anvils, ropes coiling. Behind that, the town climbs the sandstone hills, roofs patchwork under a vast sky. 30 years of building, all visible from this single point. The two well-dressed figures on the right aren't convicts. They're colonists, people who chose to be here or were born here, strolling with parasols, chatting in the breeze. A new kind of Sydney resident, free, ambitious. This exact spot where these cannons once stood is now one of the pylons of the Sydney Harbour Bridge, steel arching high. While Bolivar was liberating South America and Napoleon rotted on a rock in the South Atlantic, this was Sydney, a working harbor, waves lapping docks, a few hundred buildings scattered like stones. Aboriginal Australians around, watching quietly, their world replaced in 30 years by this intrusion. Empires falling elsewhere. Sydney still waiting for its first proper church. Prayers whispered in open air. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps us out. Drop a comment below if you'd love to see part 2. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more awesome content. Take care, everyone,